Okay, everyone, welcome to. Oh, this is the wrong slide. Give me a moment. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Hi, Shelly. Welcome. Everyone, welcome to JLI's course, Book Smart. We are in lesson 4 of 6. Today we'll be studying Halachah. Before we jump to Halachah, just to promote the 2 upcoming Purim events, we have a Purim event for adults, Purim Hamantash Bake and Megillah reading and cocktails. That's Monday, March 6th at 6 p.m. And then Tuesday. No. What? Of course, this time we have the men included. The men are invited to the Hamantash Bake. That's Monday at 6 p.m., Monday, March 6th. And then Tuesday, March 7th at 4 p.m., we have the Purim Carnival. That's more geared to younger children with pony rides and bounce castles and fun like that, and a masquerade, etc. But you can come with a costume to the Hamantash Bake as well.
When does the Hamantash eat?
Hamantash eat is Monday and Tuesday. Monday nights and Tuesday. Okay. Yeah, we'll be holding a service in the morning, 8 a.m. Kids are welcome. My kids probably won't be there. I don't trust them. Yeah, we read the Megillah twice, Monday night and Tuesday. Tuesday, there'll be 2 Megillah reading options, once in the morning or once by the family event at 4 p.m. Yes. Or the Hamantash Bake is Monday at 6 p.m. So it's in the email, all the details. Okay. Welcome to Halachah. Today we are studying Halachah, and this is a truly fascinating part of Torah. We're learning all about Torah. Let's start off by jumping on to page 150. 150 in the student books. So we're skipping a little ahead. We have figure 4.1. And here you have a map of 35 questions that were posed to halachists or poskim. They are halachic deciders that were posed throughout the ages. So I want you to take a moment to read through some of the questions that were posed. And afterwards, we're going to dive into going through some of the terms like halacha, etc. So an example of a more recent dilemma was in 1977. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked, this was a real question he was asked, conjoined twins that share a single 6-chambered heart and separating them would potentially save the life of one of them, but would kill the other. Should the procedure be performed? Right? So these are some of the questions. You have, yes, he had to decide. He had to make a ruling. Today we're not going to address all of these questions here. That's not the goal. But here's just to give a taste. In 1970, the question was raised: are organ transplants permitted according to Torah law? So these are, because you have to, especially let's say a person is brain dead, but his heart is still pumping. You have to cut it out from him to put it into the other person. Well, is that you're kind of killing the first person? Or all these thorny issues. Some of the questions are much simpler. For example, is Coke kosher? Right? So that's simple, but you have to trace it back and you have to know the ingredients that are involved in the secret recipe to figure out if Coke is kosher. There's many other fascinating questions. Some of these are older questions, like when technology came out, electricity, can you light Shabbat candles with electric light bulbs? Is it prohibited to use electricity on Shabbat? When it came out, it was very new. And there have been a lot of different writings. You can see here just a glimpse of many different questions that were asked. in Krakow, a rabbi was asked, the thief asked me if he's allowed to recite the Hamotzi blessing on stolen bread, right? These are just interesting questions that arose throughout the day. So that's the field we're going to study today, the field called Halachah. It is on the map. Everyone pull out your map. On the map we're following today, the orange line, we're in lesson 4. That's this line here. And you're not going to be able to see it so much on the slideshow, but in the map, I'll give you a good picture of where we're growing in history, because we're doing a lot of parallel histories as we're tracing different parts of Torah. So let's go to the first part. What is Halachah? What is Halachah? Let's just define the term. So Halachah means the path. So these are the laws that instruct our daily lives. A Jew knows that every single part of his life there's direction for, because Torah means instruction. And so Torah, primarily, even though it has history and it has other ethics, primarily it's a book of instructions, how to lead your life, how to lead life. Until the Torah was given, you kind of had to guess. Once the Torah was given, now you have a manual for life. And yet, we need the field of Halachah, because reading things from the 5 books of Moses doesn't really give you a great picture of how to lead your life. So that's what we're going to trace today. So let's begin back on page 148. In the words of the Torah, text 1, V'zartem esem es hachukim v'satira. Instruct them on the statutes and the teachings, make known to them the way on which they should go, and the actions that they should do. In other words, the Torah is proclaiming for itself that its mission is to tell us what to do. It's a guide to tell us how to live. And that's the main meaning of Torah. So Torah means instruction, and there is a learn. So when we study Torah, there's 2 goals in studying Torah. One is to merge our finite mind with the infinite mind of Hashem. And that is you do regardless if you gain instruction in how to lead your life. There's a healthy benefit in studying Torah for Torah's sake. Just studying Torah to gain to reprogram your mind to start thinking in godly terms. So that's one purpose of learning Torah. But the second purpose is to actually learn, how does this apply to my life? How does this change my behavior and the way I lead my life? So as a self-help, the Torah is not only a self-help, but it is also a self-help. And that field is called Halachah, the part where it tells you how to lead your life and how to guide your life. Now, in Torah, you have many opposing views. And those views don't have to be contradictory. They could be true on different dimensions of reality. So on a one level, this is true. On a deeper level, this is true. And on a deeper level, you go back to the other side. It keeps on going back and forth because the world is multidimensional. However, when we're leading our lives, in reality, we have to pick a side. So while something could be true on many levels, we have to live in one reality. And Halachah is that path. Halachah means a path or a direction, trying to figure out where you land between these 2 opposing values. So you always have values that will pull you to different extremes, and Halachah sets you on the middle path. It's holech. It's really connected to the word lech, or holech, to go. Exactly. Okay. Very good. Okay. Now, we posed some big questions in the beginning of the lesson, big questions that people were asked, but Halachah also has an opinion on little minutia. Which side should you sleep on when you go to sleep? Which shoe should you tie first? All these different minutia, and you might say, come on, separation of state and religion. There's a place for religion, there's a place for regular life. but the Torah views itself as a guide to the whole of life. So it must address every single experience, every single part of your experience in life has a healthy way to approach it. And whenever you try to go to one extreme, reality will show you that that extreme is unhealthy. And so societies keep on shifting from one extreme to the other extreme, back and forth. But halacha just stays on the middle path. So, for example, when the Jewish community it came time to deciding, there's a mitzvah to bury people in a timely fashion. You shouldn't let the deceased just sit around. You should bury them as quickly as possible. However, you have to make sure that they're dead in a halachic fashion. Halacha has rules of when you decide that a person is dead. So this is an area where Jewish community has been fighting in both directions throughout the history. There were times that the government was concerned that people were being buried while still alive. So they developed these coffins with these bells that you ring the bell in case you were put in the coffin when you were dead. Right. Someone was put in the morgue. Exactly. Right. So you have all these interesting cases, and halacha has its view, and then you had in the 1600s, the big fight for the European Jews was to get an exception to be allowed to bury right away and not have to wait 3-day waiting period, because the government wanted a 3-day waiting period on anyone who is pronounced dead. They should wait 3 days to make sure the person's really dead. So the Jewish community was fighting to keep halacha to bury as soon as possible. And then in the next century, the big argument switched, where people where enlightenment was coming, and they were coming up with new theories of what's considered dead, and their definition didn't align with halacha. So now halacha had to say, no, this person is still considered alive, so we can't bury him now. We have to wait. So you see here how halacha is a middle path, and it's consistent for the most part. It does allow for flexibility. It's built into the system, flexibility. For example, you might have a case where we'll say, Rabbi, can I do this? They say, well, how much money are you going to lose? You say, what difference does it make if it's right or wrong? Say, no. There's the preferred approach, but the Torah also values your loss of money. So sometimes the Torah allows for exceptions, and that's built in. There's a certain flexibility that's built into the straight path. So it's not as if it's a rigid path and the same law applies equally to every single person. There is flexibility, but it's within a range, and it's a pretty straight path. So let's take a look at, we're going to spend 20 minutes to go through the history of the development of halacha and how it connects to the Torah law. And then we're going to do a case study. We're going to actually start learning halacha. So let us review. Last week, we did an exploration on the Talmud. As we explained, the Jews have a rich oral tradition from Sinai on how to keep the mitzvot. And that tradition passed on 20-some generations. However, during the Roman assault on Jerusalem and the land of Israel, people couldn't be involved in studying Torah in such a deep fashion. People were just trying to survive. And so you didn't have a group that felt responsible for keeping intact the oral tradition. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he wrote down cliff notes. He wrote down, these are notes to remember the oral tradition. So it's a memory aid for the people who are losing touch with the oral tradition. So now you could study the Mishnah, and the Mishnah will remind you of all the things you're already familiar with, or hopefully you heard from your teacher already. However, over the next 400 years, people stopped remembering more and more of the oral tradition. Most of the people lived in diaspora, mainly in Babylon. And so you need the Babylonian rabbis to start filling in the gaps. He said, these were only cliff notes, but let's unpack it. Let's examine it. Let's figure out, what do these terms mean? What do they refer to? But that compilation is very long. So for a regular Jew to sit down and study, by the time he finishes studying the whole Talmud, you could get really confused. Okay, so how do I actually lead my life? And that's where Halachah comes in. Halachah were these groups of work that were trying to aid in, you could just read this work and you'll know what to do. So that's what we're focusing on here. We're in the orange track. So let's take an example. So although the Talmud and Midrash are filled with moral and philosophical teachings, post-Talmudic texts primarily focus on one area of Torah. And we'll explain that with a moment. But let's look at text 3. What we're going to do, this is a long text. This is Mishnah. And I want you, we need a volunteer. Let's get one of our online students to read text 3. Stan, you read for us text 3.
Okay.
Page 153 in the student book. This is a description of the laws of Mishnah. Let's read together, and then we'll contrast that with a book of Halacha. So go ahead, Stan.
Okay, laws of reading of the Shema, version 1. From when do we read Shema in the morning? From the time when the Kohanim enter to partake of their teruma until the end of the first watch. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The sages say until midnight. Rabban Gamliel says until dawn. It once happened that Rabban Gamliel's son returned from a party, and they said to him, "We did not read the Shema." Said he to them, "If dawn has not risen, you are obligated to read." And not only in this case, but in every case that the sages said until midnight, the mitzvah can be fulfilled until dawn. The mitzvah of burning of fats and limbs of the offerings of the holy temple is until dawn. For all the temple offerings that can be eaten for one day, the mitzvah is until dawn. If so, why did the sages say until midnight? In order to distance a person from transgressing from when do we read the Shema in the morning? From when a person can distinguish between sky blue and white. Rabbi Eliezer said, from when a person can distinguish between sky blue and leaf green, and one should finish it until sunrise. Rabbi Hoshua says, until 3 hours into the day, as that is the habit of royalty, to rise at 3 hours. The sages of the school of Shammai say in the evening, every person should recline while reading the Shema, and in the morning they should stand as it is written, when you lie down and when you rise. The sages of the school of Hillel say, every person should read after their manner as it is written, and when you go on your way. If so, why does it say when you lie down and when you rise? At the times when people lie down and the times when people rise.
Okay, so we just read the first 3 pieces of Mishnah that deal with the laws of when to say the Shema. You read this and you're like, okay, I'm lost. Where do I go from here? What did I just read? It said all these interesting things. It said you read the Shema in the evening at the time that the Kohen could eat his teruma in the temple. I don't know what teruma is. I don't know what time the Kohen went to eat his fruit in the temple. We had different opinions. I don't know which opinion to follow. That's the Mishnah. Let's compare that with a later work, a book of Halacha written by Maimonides. We'll give some background to this book later. But let's read text 4, which is his summary of the laws of reciting the Shema. So Maddie, read for us text 4.
Shema. The Shema is read twice every day, in the evening and in the morning, as it is written, when you lie down and when you rise. Meaning during the time when people lie down to sleep, which is at night, and during the time when people get up, which is the day. What does one read? 3 Torah portions. These are, Hear, O Israel, and it will be, and God said.
Continue.
No?
Continue? No? There's more?
Reading these three portions in this order is what is called reading the Shema. When is the time for reading the Shema? In the evening, the mitzvah can be fulfilled from when the stars come out until midnight. However, if a person transgressed and delayed, as long as they read the Shema before dawn, they have fulfilled their obligation, as the rule until midnight was only said in order to distance a person from negligence. When is its time by day? The mitzvah is to begin reading before sunrise, so as to conclude the reading of Shema and make the last blessing, which follows the Shema, with the rising of the sun. This interval is about 1/10 of an hour before sunrise. One who delayed and read the Shema after sunrise has fulfilled their obligation, as the time for reading the Shema for one who delayed is until the end of the first 3 hours of the day.
Okay, so let's compare and contrast some major differences that we saw between Mishnah and the way it's written in Maimonides' work called Mishnah Torah. So in the Mishnah, it doesn't tell you what the mitzvah of Shema is. It assumes you know what Shema is because it's a memory aid. You already heard the oral tradition. It doesn't need to tell you what Shema is. Everyone knows what Shema is. Okay, so it has to deal with certain of the details. What time is the appropriate time to say the Shema? However, in the Maimonides book, he's feeding you every single information. He's telling you, let me tell you what Shema is. There's a biblical verse that tells you that you have to say Shema. And these are the verses that have to be recited. Okay, you know what Shema is. In the Mishnah, here's another difference. In the Mishnah, it records a variety of opinions because these are important to know as part of the oral tradition. Even though in Halacha we only follow one path, it's important to always be aware of the other opinions for a few reasons. And I'll just mention two here. One reason that you might want to know a divergent opinion is in case of an extreme case. So for example, you're in an emergency and you're not able to do the halacha. So should you do nothing? Or maybe you should suffice and follow a minority opinion. That's what we might tell you to do. Another thing is, sometimes a rabbi might wake up later on and say, I don't agree with the Mishnah. I disagree. They probably haven't considered a certain interpretation. So Rabbi Yehuda wrote down all the interpretations they considered so that you know that they deliberated on the issue, they brought in divergent opinions, and yet they still decided to rule in a certain way. So it gives a more legitimacy to a ruling. Versus Maimonides' book is here to tell you how to live. So you open it and you know exactly the final ruling. And finally, the goal of Mishnah is a memory aid. So we'll put it'll pack a variety of different laws together in order that when you're learning one thing, you're remembering something else. So it's a great memory aid, but it's not good for getting clarity on how to live. When you're trying to figure out how to read Shema, you want to read only about Shema. You don't want to hear about the Kohen eating teruma. So these are some examples. We see the difference between Halacha and the Mishnah. One of the things we start to notice as history develops is if you look here on the second half of the chart, you see that a lot of the works only developed in the last 1,500 years. You see, before 1,500 years, you don't have these special genres of Torah. There's just one genre called Torah. As it gets later on, all of a sudden you have all these different genres. You have Halachah, you have Musar, you have Kabbalah, you have Chassidut, you have all these different genres. What's happening? Why is that? Because as long as you have the oral tradition was teacher to student, and he was guiding you on the whole of life. The whole of life doesn't just embrace one genre. It embraces diversity. So, for example, if I would say, what is a marriage? Is a marriage that one spouse goes to work and the other spouse cooks and cleans? Well, I would say that's a very one-dimensional view of marriage. That's one-dimensional. But it is a dimension. And then you have another dimension, the romantic part, all these different layers to a marriage. And what happens is in the oral tradition, when you're learning from a person, you're learning all the different dimensions from one person. In the later centuries, as the people get divorced from teachers, and now they have to rely on books, so the books start becoming specialized. And so you have a book that teaches you how to lead your life in practice. Then you have another set of books that teach you how to feel about life and how to think about life. A whole different set of books. When you're learning from a teacher, it's all integrated. Hopefully you see the teacher living an integrated life. So now the students are living an integrated life. But when the students are lacking access to teachers, to learn from books, you can't learn from a book how to synthesize everything together. So you have to start looking in different parts of the library for different parts of Torah. And that's what happens throughout centuries. So let's look at the major developments of Halachah. Okay? Halachah in general consists of these four categories, halachic works. The goal is to tell you how to lead your life. But the first part is called the digests. The digests are here to help you gain clarity on the final ruling. So the first digest was written by a man named Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. He lived in Fez. He was born in Spain. He lived in Fez. He lived before Maimonides, before Rashi, before any of these characters came on the scene. He lived on the scene. Now, what happened was, let's go back to the slide one more second. It's hard to see what's going on here, but here you have the 24 books of the Torah was written. Then you have the Mishnah and the Talmud. The Talmud was concluded in Babylon. For 500 years, the center of Judaism was in Babylon. And whenever a Jew had a question, how to lead their life, they would just send in their questions to the rabbis of Babylon. So you had a central authority for 500 years called the Gaonim, the Gaonic period. And those 500 years everything was kind of set in stone. So they were just teaching you Talmud, and they were just making it practical.
Was it all Jewish people? There was no Sephardic around?
There was no Sephardic or Ashkenaz at this point. At this point in history, almost all Jews were centralized, or at least even if they lived away from the community, there was no other center. The only center of Torah decisions was in Babylon. Okay? That existed for 500 years. But then eventually what happened was other centers started emerging in Europe, in North Africa. And when those centers started emerging, all of a sudden you had different opinions. Many of the countries were under different rulers that prohibited communication between the different countries. So all of a sudden you had diverse opinions, and you couldn't pose questions. So people started developing their own customs. And that's when one of these men, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, he decided people can't learn the whole Talmud to figure out the ruling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the Talmud Katan. He didn't call it that name, but it was called the small Talmud. He basically cut out any discussion that's not related to Jewish law. He cut it out. Any discussion that is related to Jewish law, but is not the final opinion, he cut it out. And so you had an abridged Talmud. Now, he didn't have the audacity to say, this is the Talmud you should be learning. He put it in the back of the regular Talmuds. And so now, you want to know the laws of Shema? What's the final ruling of the Mishnah? You could go there and just find it. And for the most part, it's a digest. So that's a concept of a digest. A digest is taking a bigger body of work and distilling it to how to lead your life. Now, the problem with even that, even a digest has its flaws, because a digest is still borrowing the language of the original book. Sometimes you need filler information. For example, what is the mitzvah of Shema? So that was one of the first work was by Maimonides. Maimonides said, I'm going to rearrange. I'm going to just take the information from the Talmud, but I'm not going to use the language of the Talmud. The Talmud is a mix of Hebrew in the Mishnah and Aramaic in the Talmud. I'm writing in a clear Hebrew, one voice, because sometimes you have different dialects of Aramaic, depends on who quoted, which statement was quoted, right? But one Hebrew, all the laws, simple. You just open these 14 books, and each book is systemized, and you know all the laws of the Torah. Every single law that in the Torah that exists, you have it. In Maimonides' opinion, he said, you could read the Torah scrolls, the 5 books of Moses, and then you read my book, and you don't need anything else in between. You know how to live your life as a Jew. Now, his book was a revolution, but there were people that disagreed. First of all, he didn't quote his sources. He didn't quote how he got this work from the Talmuds. So now he just said it as a fact. And I said, okay, that other rabbi said, well, it's nice you're saying it as a fact, but maybe we don't agree with your final result. And that was one of the things Maimonides actually regretted. He said, I wish I would have put my sources in the text. The reason I didn't put my sources, I was thinking of the end user. The end user is a layperson. He's just interested in knowing the final law. So I didn't want to confuse with all the text. But because of that, people challenged, or people very vocal against Maimonides. And even though Maimonides is seen as a watershed moment in the halachic development, it didn't become the only voice in halacha. There were other systems of halacha developed. Now, what's interesting about Maimonides, and this exists until today, is Maimonides' work includes the details of every single mitzvah, even mitzvahs that are not applicable today, mitzvahs that only apply in temple times in the land of Israel. He included all those laws. And in those areas, he is the only halachist to come with a decision. Most halachists were only writing halacha that was relevant to where they lived. So when it comes to those issues, messianic issues, or he's the only decider. There's no one that disagrees with him because nobody else wrote. So when you're studying from a more recent book of Jewish law, you're probably not learning in those book of Jewish law. They cut out. They're trying to make the work accessible. That's the whole point of halacha, to make it this accessible, to teach you how to lead your life. So they excluded anything that speaks about temple services, like the holy temple services or sacrifices or things that were purity laws. So those things were cut out. There is an interesting backstory that when you have time, it might be advisable to read it. It's the additional readings in the lesson, which is a tradition. There's debates whether it's true or not, but it's how the other academies sprung up outside of Babylon. We said the centers of Torah was in Babylon. How did other centers pop up everywhere else? And so the tradition goes that there was actually 4 great sages that went on a fundraising mission, and they were kidnapped by pirates, and the pirates ransomed them off to different Jewish communities throughout, like, North Africa, then Southern Europe and Western Europe. And that's how those 4 rabbis were sold to those 4 places. The communities didn't have such great authorities. And so those communities followed whatever these new rabbis said as their teachers. And that's how those 4 new centers sprung up. And the Rif, who we spoke about, he was the one who made a digest, the first digest of the Talmud. He was a second generation from one of those great rabbis. He learned from Rabbi Hananel, and Rabbi Hananel learned from one of those 4 great teachers. So that's an example. So that's digest. Then you have codes. We gave Maimonides, right? A code is where you arrange the laws by topic. Then you have commentaries. For example, a commentary on Maimonides would be, what were the sources that Maimonides was relying on when he made this decision? or there's two sin over here. This my ruling of Maimonides seems to contradict a ruling from somewhere else. What's the difference between these two cases? So you have all these commentaries that build. And lastly, which is the most interesting, not for a practicing Jew, but more for a halachic rabbi, is the responsa. A responsa is a letter that, or an essay that tackles one specific issue. So for example, the map we looked at in the beginning, where people are asked, that case of Moshe Feinstein, the two babies are joined at the heart. What should he do? So he made his ruling, and afterwards his son-in-law sat down and went over with him. How did you arrive at this ruling? What was the back and forth? So a response is usually one or two lines, the question, and then pages and pages of analyzing the different discussions that existed on this topic in Torah literature and how he arrived at the conclusion. And sometimes you'll have someone else will write a response. So he'll say, I saw everything that he wrote, and I think his conclusion was mistaken because he interpreted certain of the parts a little off, and now I have my own opinion.
How does that compare to the Mishnah, which has the different opinions to start with before you get to the final ruling? Now you got the final ruling, now you have different opinions on the final ruling. Exactly.
As we explained last week, that's what constantly happens throughout history, is you have this digest, compress to make it more accessible, and then you have unpacking to try to unpack, like, how did we get to that conclusion? And then it gets compressed, digestible, and then gets expanded. And that keeps on happening every 500 years about. You go through that stage. Because you get too much information, it's an overload, so we need a search engine to help you find the right information. But then you say, how do I know that they're feeding me without a bias? Maybe Google has its bias, maybe Bing has its bias. How do I know I'm not getting biased? So now you have to unpack the algorithm, and it keeps on going back and forth, back and forth. Okay, now we'll watch the lesson videos. This is, for this part of the lesson, we're going to use our charts on page 158. So everyone open up your book to 158. You turn your book, and on 158, I don't have a color, but this is going through history. So we're gonna watch the video. It's gonna follow this map tracing Jewish law, and then when we go to study a case, we're gonna look at a rabbinic responsa that was written, and we're gonna follow how he traces his decision based on all the legal precedent that he's building on from the earlier works. So let us begin.
Now that we have defined the various types of halachic works, let us take a tour of the tree of halachic works you see here on the screen, and learn about the books and authors that represent major milestones in the history of halacha. The most primary source of Torah law is, of course, the Torah itself, which contains the 613 mitzvot, or biblical commandments, along with the laws communicated to Moses at Sinai and transmitted orally through the generations. For many generations, these laws, as well as the detailed explanations of the laws written in the Torah, were transmitted by word of mouth from teacher to disciple, until they were recorded in the very first halachic code, the Mishnah, by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi 1800 years ago. The next major documentation of Torah law was the voluminous commentary on the Mishnah known as the Talmud. The Talmud records many thousands of discussions by hundreds of sages extending over 7 generations and more than 300 years. When the Talmud was redacted in the beginning of the 6th century, it was the most comprehensive record of Torah law compiled up until that point. After the Talmud came the Gaonim, who for 500 years headed the great Torah academies in Babylonia. The Gaonim wrote commentaries and digests on the Talmud. They also authored numerous responses to halachic queries that were sent to them from Jewish communities all across the world. During the Gaonic era, the entire Jewish world looked to the great yeshivot of Babylonia as the authority on all matters of Torah law. But beginning in the 11th century, a period known as the era of the Rishonim, there emerged centers of Torah learning throughout the Jewish diaspora, in North Africa, Spain, and Western and Southern Europe. One of the early Rishonim was Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, known as Rif, who lived and taught in Morocco and Spain. The Rif authored the most important halachic work of his time, a halachic digest of the Talmud. Another important digest of the Talmud was compiled about 250 years later by the Rosh. The Rishonim also authored many of the great commentaries on the Talmud, without which the Talmud would be a closed book to us today. While these commentaries are not halachic works per se, their explanations and discussions of Talmudic passages determine how many points of Torah law are applied. The Rishonim also wrote many thousands of halachic responsa, applying their Talmudic knowledge to issues of the day. But the most important developments in the literature of halacha in this period are two major halachic codes. The first is the Halachic Code, completed in the year 1180 by Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, or the Rambam. Maimonides titled his code Mishnah Torah, which means review of the Torah. Indeed, Mishnah Torah is the only halachic code that covers all areas of Torah law, including laws pertaining to the service in the Holy Temple and the agricultural laws that apply only in the land of Israel. Mishnah Torah systemized all the laws in the Talmud, as well as the rulings of the Gaonim during the nearly 700 years from the closing of the Talmud to Maimonides' own time. But as monumental and comprehensive a work this code was, it would still not be the final word on halacha. New halachic questions kept on being raised. Furthermore, not all of the halachas agreed with Maimonides' conclusions. For example, the Ravad, Rav Avraham ben David of Puskeris, authored glosses on the Mishnah Torah in which he presents his disagreements with one of Maimonides' rulings. Consequently, in the generations following Maimonides, many more halachic works of all four types, digests, codes, commentaries, and responsa, were written. About 150 years after Maimonides, a major halachic code was compiled in Spain by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the son of the Rosh. While this code was more limited in that it only included laws that were relevant to Jewish life at that time, it expanded on Maimonides' code by including rulings from dozens of halachic works composed parallel to Maimonides' code and in the generations that followed. Rabbi Yaakov organized his code into 4 turim, or columns, each covering a different area of halacha: Orach Chaim, way of life; Yoredea, instructor of knowledge; Even HaEzer, stone of salvation; and Choshen Mishpat, breastplate of judgment. After the Torah published his code, many great halachas wrote commentaries on this work. As we will see, 2 of these commentaries form the basis for the next major halachic code, the Shulchan Aruch. During the era of the Rishonim, 2 primary schools of halacha had formed, each with its own unique customs and traditions. The Sephardic school, followed by the Jewish communities of Spain, Southern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, and the Ashkenazic school, followed by the communities of Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. For example, Rif and Maimonides were both Sephardic sages. On the other hand, the author of the Torah tended more toward the rulings and customs of the Ashkenazic traditions, contained in the works of the Tosafists, his father the Rosh, and other Ashkenazic halachic authorities. The beginning of the 16th century saw a shift of focus among the halachists. These Acharonim, or later sages as they're called, did not, as a rule, consider themselves qualified to argue with the Torah sages of earlier generations, the Rishonim. Thus, while the Rishonim looked to the Talmud and the writings of the Gaonim as their primary sources of halachic rulings, the halachic works, composed by the Acharonim, focus on navigating the rulings and opinions of the Rishonim.
Okay. Any questions before we move on to, there's another video that I'm going to show here.
Do you learn that in Shiva in up until high school, or was?
We don't learn all those books. We might learn parts of a book. When we're studying Talmud, we want to see how it's concluded in the digest of the Rif. What's interesting is in Italy, they did a book burning of the Talmud, but for some reason they allowed them to keep the Rif. So the Rif was in the back of the Talmud, so the Talmuds were ripped in half, so to speak. All the Talmuds were burnt, but the Rif they got to keep. So the Italian Jews became very loyal to the Rif because that was the books they had available during those time period. But what a yeshiva student will start his learning is from this later work, the Shulchan Aruch, which we're going to watch a video on in a moment. And it depends what your goal is. If you're trying to learn Talmud, to learn the commentaries on Talmud. If you're trying to figure out how to lead your life, so then you start from the more recent works, and then you try to work your way back up.
So
Yeah. So you either start at the beginning and trace your way down to current time, or you start at the end and then you try to build out. Very rarely do you start in the middle. Okay.
In 1492, the mass expulsion of Jews in the Spanish Inquisition created waves of refugees throughout Europe and the Middle East. As Sephardic Jews from Spain intermingled with Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, people became confused about which traditions and rules to follow. Two rabbis rose to settle the matter. Though these two men were from different traditions and never even met, their conflict and collaboration defined Judaism for half a millennium. The Jewish oral tradition represents the collected wisdom of rabbis over thousands of years, interpreting the Torah, arguing, and building consensus on what it means to be Jewish. These rules, called Halachah, cover everything from prayers and festivals to dietary and marriage guidelines to procedures in court. They defined and shaped the entirety of Jewish life for millions of people. But by the start of the 16th century, the tradition was in trouble. Disputes between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, arguments between rabbis about the correct opinions, an explosion of new interpretations of the Torah, and a rise in spiritualist philosophies like Kabbalah meant that nobody could agree which opinions were right or which rules to follow. In 1522, Rabbi Yosef Karo decided to fix this. Born in Spain 4 years before the expulsion of the Jews, Karo eventually settled in Sfat, a holy city near the Sea of Galilee. A mystic and a scholar, Rabbi Karo spent 20 years compiling 32 different Jewish authorities into a catalog of Jewish law that he called the Beit Yosef. When there was disagreement, as there frequently was, he went with majority rule between the three most prominent scholars, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. Although the Beit Yosef was a work of astonishing scholarship, it was also very, very long. So Rabbi Karo created a summary that listed the decisions from the Beit Yosef, defining once and for all what he called the fixed final law. It was like spark notes for 2,000 years of Jewish oral tradition. Rabbi Karo called it the Shulchan Aruch, Hebrew for a set table. While many Jewish scholars embraced the brilliance and utility of the Shulchan Aruch, a fierce backlash arose. Prominent rabbis decried Karo for streamlining Jewish law and disregarding the disagreements that were a central feature of Halachah. Others protested that Karo's choice to go with majority rule between two Sephardic rabbis and only one Ashkenazi rabbi strongly favored Sephardic interpretations, a serious problem for Ashkenazi Jews who were not willing to give up hundreds of years of unique customs. Luckily for Ashkenazi Jews, Rabbi Karo wasn't the only scholar working on a unified code of Halachah. Rabbi Moses Isserlis was a brilliant scholar of Torah who founded a yeshiva in Krakow, Poland. He too recognized that the oral tradition had become overly confusing. While Rabbi Karo was writing the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Isserlis was compiling Ashkenazi Halacha into a book titled the Darkei Moshe. He was nearly finished with his masterpiece when Karo's Shulchan Aruch arrived in Poland. The Shulchan Aruch created a dilemma for Rabbi Isserlis. Publishing the Darkei Moshe would reassert Ashkenazic tradition, but exacerbate the chaos of contradictory rulings. He faced a difficult choice: accept Rabbi Karo's conclusions and lose centuries of Ashkenazi traditions, or publish a competing book and risk a schism. Rabbi Isserlis instead came up with a third approach. Recognizing that Jewish unity was essential, Rabbi Isserlis abandoned the Darkei Moshe and instead used his knowledge to create a series of additions to Rabbi Karo's work. Since Karo had called his text the set table, Isserlis called his additions the mapah, or tablecloth. For any laws in the Shulchan Aruch that were different for Ashkenazis, Isserlis added glosses that explained the variances. Thus, Rabbi Isserlis preserved the Ashkenazi tradition without creating disunity. Isserlis then printed the Shulchan Aruch with both Karo's original text and his additions, consolidating the two traditions into one book. By abandoning his own book and instead combining his knowledge with Rabbi Karo's, Rabbi Isserlis guaranteed the continuation of the Ashkenazi tradition while lending his wisdom to the combined text. This new Shulchan Aruch, complete with its tablecloth, quickly became the definitive text on Jewish law, a text that united Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews. It was studied in yeshivas around the world, and later scholars added additional glosses and commentaries, placing their own dishes on the table that Rabbi Karo set. It remains a guiding light, a constitution of the Jewish people, nearly as important as the Torah or the Talmud. The story of the Shulchan Aruch represents the best of Jewish tradition. It marks a dedication to scholarship, combined with an appreciation of practicality, a unified text that still incorporates disagreement, and a recognition that, at the end of the day, working together makes...
Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
so between Sephardic and Ashkenazi, A lot is just minutia, meaning past over dishes and stuff like that. What's the most contentious differential?
Most contentious differential? Hard to think offhand. Hard to think. You're putting me on the spot. So I'm thinking, but like an issue we discussed on Shabbos, for example, is glass. According to Sephardic, glass is kosherable. It doesn't need to be kosherized. You could pour hot soup on it, that's meat, and then pour hot milk on it, and the glass is still kosher.
No.
No, you're right. So this is a good point. Agrees there's 613 mitzvahs. What happens is sometimes you're introduced to two values, and when those two values collide, so then you have to figure out where does the balance lie between these two values that the Torah illustrated to us. How do I find the balance? Now, sometimes it lands this way, and sometimes it lands that way, and some of that is dependent on the community, on where it lands. Sometimes these things are historically taking history into consideration. For example, there was a big question about Jews who converted to other religions out of pressure, and the question was how to view them when they come back. Well, in countries that had more people converting out of pressure, that took a different interpretation when it came time to re-include them in the community versus because it was a different value. One was trying to preserve the purity, so people that converted were seen as less pure, versus other people is if we cut off, you can't cut off so many people. So it's always trying to find the right balance between these two competing values. And that's something we're going to see in our workshop. The decision we're going to workshop today is we're going to see two Torah values, and we're going to try to make sense of how to apply that value. Now, we concluded the video here with the book called the Shulchan Aruch. Like the Talmud of its day became this consensus, even though the Babylonian Talmud wasn't the only work that existed before that time. There was the Jerusalem Talmud, but the Babylonian Talmud became the go-to first stop in its generation. The Shulchan Aruch, with the notes of Rav Moshe Isserles, with the tablecloth, became the defining book. The first stop, the first destination of its time. However, afterwards, new questions arose or dissenting opinions developed. So you had all these commentaries. So what do you need further? 300 years later, you have a new re-summarized version, such as the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. Most of that book was burnt in a fire, but the quarter that remained became a very valuable starting point. And then the commentaries on that got too large. So one of the most popular from the last 200 years is a book called the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, the abridged Code of Jewish Law, where first of all, he took out anything that a layman doesn't need to know. In Code of Jewish Law, you have a lot of things that have to do with rules of sitting on a court. Well, why do I have to know what the judges need to know? So it's cut out from this book. So this is a simple way, if you want to know how to lead your life as a Jewish person, this is a good starting point. Some might say, well, it's missing the last 200 years of the halachic development. You don't have electric ovens in here. You don't have microwaves. You don't have in vitro fertilization. You don't have, how are you supposed to know how to lead your life today? So there's constantly new updates and expansions and digests to resolve that issue. So when that's only 2 volumes. This is English. 2 volumes, you can learn it and you know how to live as a Jew. But again, it's from 200 years ago. So today, you still need to ask a rabbi some questions. But one of the main things to remember here is that until 1500 years ago, people were primarily learning from rabbis, and then we're using the books as memory aids. 1500 years ago, it switched to people looking to the book as a primary source, because you didn't have access to rabbis or authoritative rabbis. You looked at the book as a primary source, and then you asked the rabbi to give you his expert opinion on how to navigate the book and things like that.
is.
Right. So many rabbis have specialties. So a rabbi that could do a wedding cannot necessarily do a Jewish divorce, or could do a divorce, cannot necessarily do a conversion. And usually the people build a reputation, and it's really by consensus. Just like the Code of Jewish Law was written by people agreed that it was authoritative, so that's how it worked. So it was the consensus building that actually makes it authoritative. And that's how it is today. No rabbi is elected, except for in Israel, they have some elections with the chief rabbis there. And then they still made rulings today. Okay, so let's go into our case study. This is the fun part. You ready for this? Let's start. Now's your chance to have some tea, some coffee, because now we get to grapple with a halachic issue. So we're going to look at one of the cases on the map. Was a rabbi who lived in the Kovna ghetto in the 1930s and 40s, and he was asked this question. Let's jump to his case, actually. Let's see if I can find the full reading of it. Let's jump ahead to text 17. Okay, let's get a volunteer. Genya, if you could read for us text 17, it's on page 169 in the student book. Listen to this reading because it's chilling.
The white cards in the Kovna ghetto. On Elul 16, 5701, September 8, 1941, the Nazis SS commander Gok arrived in Lithuania. It was he who in the end liquidated the Kovna ghetto. The reputation of this evil and bloodthirsty murder had preceded him, evoked panic among those imprisoned in the ghetto. As immediately upon his arrival, he executed a number of Jews. At that time, there arose the issue of the notorious white cards. The matter was as follows. Yarden, the German commander of the Kovno ghetto, instructed the Jewish council to distribute among the workers in the ghetto 5,000 white cards, which he gave to them. These individuals would be the only ones allowed to remain in the ghetto with their families, while the rest would be liquidated. At the time, there were about 30,000 Jews in the ghetto, including 10,000 workers. I was asked, are those who were grabbing white cards for themselves to save themselves acting properly, knowing that they are preventing another Jewish family from being saved? Yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah.
This is a really tricky question to deal with, and it's real life. Now, either we could sit around and all come up with our own opinions of how we feel about a matter, but a Jew says, what does the Torah say? So now we're going to workshop how Rabbi Oshry came to his decision that he made in that moment. Before we do that, I'm curious to hear, what do you feel? What does your gut tell you is the right decision? Is it okay for these people to take a white card for themselves, knowing that by taking a white card, it's going to leave other people to perish?
It's tricky.
Heavy.
Yeah.
Heavy question.
It's heavy.
Right? No, just you get to stay to work. But maybe was it also your family? Those individuals would be the only ones allowed to remain in the ghetto with their families. No, so also their families, while the rest would be liquidated. Heavy question. There's other questions that he was asked connected to this was, what should the council do? Should they distribute the cards? Should they not distribute? And how should they distribute? But that we're going to keep it narrow for the sake of dealing with this question. Now, this rabbi who answered this question, he passed away in 2003. So he lived a long time. It's relevant. These questions we feel like, oh, this was asked 1,000 years ago, but it's actually, he's a contemporary in a way, a legend, Rabbi Ephraim Ushri. So, what?
He had a wife.
No, no, he went to the camps, but by miracles he survived. Liquidated to the camps, but then what happened there? Eventually, the whole ghetto was liquidated. It was only for a while. Eventually, the whole ghetto was liquidated. Okay, let's go through the building blocks, and you could always refer back to that tree, that family tree, that halachic tree that we had, 2-page spread. So you could always see to try to mirror. Hold on, from which era is this quote coming from? And it's very relevant to here. So let's start off. This is the tree we're referring to. This is the tree of Halachah, figure 4.2, to track our progress. So the first starting point is the pikuach nefesh principle, which can we save? And the question here is, can we save one life at the expense of another? So the first value we have to arise at is text 5 in our book. Let's take a look at text 5. Is this text where it says, God created human beings in the image of God, which means that our life is as valuable as is God. How valuable is my life? How valuable is God? God is infinitely valuable. Your life is infinitely valuable. You take a look at the later text 6 is commentary on the Torah, written in the Mishnaic age, writes as follows. Why are there 2 tablets? Why aren't the 10 commandments just written as a list? I'm saying things outside just to save us time, so we could work our way through. But you can look at text 6 if you want to see the full quote. Why is it written in 2 tablets? That's to tell us that there's really 2 first commandments. There's the top of tablet 1 and the top of tablet 2 are both first commandments. So the 2 first commandments are, I am the Lord your God, and do not murder. What's the connection? As we just explained, you're created in the image of God. Your human life is as valuable as is God. Our life is an extension of God. So spilling blood is like diminishing the stature of God. So we have here the infinite value of life. So let me ask you an easy question. If I said you have 2 choices, you're a Jew. Either you could keep God or you could keep the mitzvah of shofar. What is more important, to have God or the shofar? God. That's the foundation. The building block of shofar is God. So now if I were to ask you, what's more important, to blow the shofar or to save a human life?
Save a human life. Yeah.
That's it. You see the development, you see the progression. We just built a building block that we have to keep the Torah. We have to, sometimes it comes a cost at financial loss, but not at the expense of human life. Human life is most important. Now we go to text 7. Okay, and this is where it's expressed. Let's find text 7. Let's read it inside. So text 7 is on page 161. Okay, and this is again from the Torah. It says, you shall keep my statutes and my laws, which a person shall do and live by them. I am God. So God is telling you, please keep my laws. Do whatever it takes to keep my laws and live by them. So comes along the Talmud, text 8, and says, with all the transgressions of the Torah, if a person is told transgress so that you shall not be killed, they should transgress rather than be killed. For the Torah says, live by them, not to die by them. Okay? So if your life is at risk to do a mitzvah, you save a life. Life is more precious. Straightforward so far. Okay, let's see how far, because we know the Torah values Shabbat. The Torah values Shabbat on the narrowest, obviously we're cutting out a lot of context, But someone who violates the Shabbat in public with witnesses and a warning, by the letter of the law, he gets thrown off a cliff. By the letter of the law. So we see how serious Shabbat is. The Torah says keeping Shabbat is a fundamental. However, what happens if there's an earthquake and a building collapses and it's Shabbat and there's a life trapped underneath the building? Are you allowed to violate the Shabbat and remove the stones, sort through the rubble to save the life? What's the answer?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So we see over here how valuable. We're just reaffirming. Let's look. Come on. The chief rabbi of Israel came out with a ruling because the question was posed. We know in the narrower sense, the Torah normally speaks about saving a life. It's talking about saving a Jewish life. What about saving a non-Jewish life, especially you're a delegation from a foreign country? Should you stop to work on Shabbat or should you continue to work on Shabbat? And his ruling was that you should continue to work to save lives even on Shabbos. Okay.
What a Jewish and Jewish.
Yeah, the couple. Yeah. Let's look at, now let me ask you a question. What if you're standing outside the collapsed building and you know that the person trapped under the building, even if you save him, he's going to die a few days later? Are you allowed to violate the Shabbat then?
Yes.
Wow, everyone knows. Okay, so you don't have to go to yeshiva. You know it already. Okay, so text 10. Let's read text 10. The Mishnah states, which was text 9. Text 9 was the Mishnah. But in text 10, it says, the Mishnah states, if the person is found alive, we continue clearing the rubble. The Talmud asks, isn't this obvious? You found him. Why would you stop clearing the rubble? You found him alive. Why would you stop clearing the rubble? So it says, this needs to be stated in order to tell us that we continue our efforts, even in the case that the person is mortally wounded and can only live a short while. So you see, we just built another building block. Living a short while is also infinitely valuable. Just like God is infinitely valuable, life for a short moment. You know, the person will die in a few weeks, a few days. Now let's look how this building block is developed in the next generation of halachic deciders. Let's go to the Rif. We mentioned Rabbi Yitzchak Alpasi. Look what he writes in text 11. Let me just jump to the slide, text 11. Okay, text 11. A dying person has the legal status of a living person in every respect. You're dying, doesn't matter. You're still considered living. As it is written, not until the silver cord snaps. One who touches a dying person in any way that hastens their death is a murderer. Okay? A murderer. Now, will a Jewish court that had authority get involved and say you're a murderer and try you like a murderer? No. We're talking about in the heavenly courts, you're considered like a murderer. Not in a regular judicial court, but it's equal. It's tantamount to murder. You say, but he was in pain. I wanted to ease his pain. This is a real question that many people grapple with today. Okay? No, you don't murder someone, even if the person asks you to murder them. Life has infinite value, and it goes by an infinite design paradigm, not on a utilitarian paradigm of how much work can you produce. Or, all right, now I made it black and white, but it's not black and white. Speak to a rabbi when you come to these issues. And when you'll ask me such a question, I have my rabbis I ask to, because I'm not, you have to go to specialized rabbis that specialize in these areas. Certainly, you cannot commit suicide because you can't take a life, even your own. You can't even self-harm yourself because your body's not your own. Your body belongs to Hashem. You're the guardian of your body. So you can only preserve your life. Your body, you cannot. Okay, so now here's the question that a Talmudic sage was asked in Babylon. He lived, his name was Rava, and text 12. Let's read this question. Now we get into the more stickier parts. A person came before Rava and said to him, the chieftain of my village said to me, kill so-and-so, and if you do not do so, I will kill you. So he's coming to Rava. What should I do? If I don't kill so-and-so, I'm going to be killed. What should he do? What? But isn't the preservation of life so important? He has a mitzvah to preserve his life. Right? Remember we said you should violate shofar to save your life? So this person says, let me violate the prohibition on murdering to save my life. This was his question to Rava. What was Rava's answer? Let yourself be killed, rather than that you should kill. Why do you think that your blood is redder than theirs? Perhaps the blood of that person is redder. So here you have a new principle that says this whole thing of violating Torah commandments to save a life doesn't apply when you're coming to murder somebody else. Because the redder blood principle. Okay?
Right? Doesn't
Yes.
this go back to the Ten Commandments where the second tablet said, thou shalt not kill? And in this case, if you don't kill the other person, that person will kill you. But in either case, you're not doing the actual killing.
That's right. You're not going to, but you'll be killed.
But
You
you're
will
not
be
doing
killed.
the killing.
You're not doing the killing. That's right. That's right. Okay, so let's look how the commentary in the next generation develop this. Okay, they're trying to understand. Hold on. Your blood is not redder than his blood, but his blood is not redder than yours. So you have two lives that are both infinitely valuable. So why shouldn't you save your life and kill the other person? So that's the principle. So let's look at Rashi and text 13. The pikuach nefesh principle states that the mitzvot are set aside in order to save a life. Where one life is saved, but another life is destroyed, the pikuach nefesh principle does not apply. In other words, true, we put aside everything, all the mitzvot, to save a life. But by killing another life to save a life, you didn't gain anything, because now you still have one less infinitely valuable life. So in that case, you're not allowed to violate the prohibition of murder in order to save a life. Okay? So that's text 13. Now let's go. We're seeing the building blocks. These are all the building blocks that Rav Ephraim Ushri quotes when he's making this decision of the white cards. But we're not there yet. We're going to get to the white card dilemma soon. Let's go into another scenario. Okay, let's look at text 14. I'm going to say the question outside, and you'll tell me what you think. Two people are traveling in the desert. One person drank all his water. He has no water left. The other person still has a bottle. I loaded the question. Let me clear the scenario. Two people meet in the desert. They say, you want to join me on this hike? Sure. As they're going, they get lost, and they're stuck in the desert for too long, and they realize that they don't have the next city is a day's journey away. But if they don't drink any water, they're going to die before they get to that city. Lucky one of them actually has a bottle of water, but it's only enough water for one of them. If he shares his water with the other person, they'll both die. If he keeps it all for himself, he's going to live. So what do you think? He has to share it? Yeah. Both lives are equal. What do you think? Not share it. He should drink it for himself. The other guy's going to die. Okay, what do you what?
Offer to the other person.
That's a sacrifice, right? You're right. You're saying
You're not taking the life.
right. Okay. No. Wow.
Share
Hi,
it.
Mayor. Share it. Kenya says share it. So we have a divided court, And the good news is that you're in good company. Let's read what? No. Let's read text. Which text are we? Text 14. 2 people are traveling and one of them has a jug of water. If they both drink, both will die of thirst. If only one drinks, he will make it to a settled place. How does the Mishnah rule? Ben Pitorah expounded, better that both should drink and die than one should witness the death of the other. But then Rabbi Akiva came and taught. The Torah states, your brother shall live with you. Your life comes before the life of your fellow. So it has to live with you, but if you're not going to live, then you don't have a mitzvah to help them live at the expense of your life. In other words, it's with you. The with is always a second level. It's not equal to you. It's one level beneath you. Okay, so everyone found, great. I was like Ben Pitorah, I was like Rabbi Akiva. Good. How does the Jewish law decide? Like Rabbi Akiva. We follow Rabbi Akiva that you drink the water yourself. Good job, okay? You drink the water yourself, and the other person dies. Now you'll say, hold on, that's not consistent with the building blocks we built a second ago. We just said your blood is not redder than somebody else's blood. So you have one bottle of water. Why should you live at the expense of somebody else? Now we go on to the next generation of what? Dilemma. Now, how do we resolve it? Let's go to the next. Now we go on to the next. Text. Text 15. Before we do text 15, let me build you an important principle in Jewish law that makes it different than many other moral questions that people are asked. In Jewish law, you are not responsible for life and death. You are only responsible for moral behavior, because life and death is the hands of God. Only your behavior has to be a moral behavior. But outcomes, you're not responsible for outcomes. So when many people are asked a moral question, like the train question, the 2 tracks, 5 people on this track and 1 person on this track, should you pull the lever? Everyone familiar with that dilemma? No, so I just confused people. Okay, fine. But in general, people think that we have to choose who will live and who will die. But that's not the Jewish choice to make. We don't choose who will live and who will die. God chooses who will live. Or things, that's not our control. Our only control is how we should behave. And how do we behave? Whatever the Torah tells us is the right thing to do. So even if we feel like we're making a choice that's resulting in more people dying, we're not causing the other people to die. That's how Hashem is running his world. We just have to make the moral choice in every situation. So let's apply that over here. The difference between the mobster saying, kill your friend or I'm going to kill you, versus the case of Rabbi Akiva, of the jug, the one jug. Can anyone think of any difference between the 2 cases? In Rabbi Akiva's case of the jug, you're not actively killing your friend. Your friend is left to no intervention by Hashem, is going to die. But a miracle might happen. That's Hashem's problem. Let Hashem bring water from the sky, right? It's not my responsibility to make sure he lives. It's my responsibility to do everything I can. But Torah first says you have to save your own life before you help you save somebody else. But in the case of the mobster is telling you to do an action. Kill. Oh, killing, that I'm not allowed to do. Killing, I'm not allowed. My Torah doesn't allow me to kill, even to save my own life. But to drink a cup of water, that's fine. I'm not killing somebody else by drinking a cup of water. I'm not killing him. Nature is killing him. That's the distinction here.
So could I ask you a question?
Save your life before you save that one.
Could I ask you a
So
question?
yeah, that's exactly right. Hold on, Kenya, give me a second. Yeah, that's exactly the principle. Save your life so you could be there to save other people's life. Yeah, Kenya, go ahead.
During the Holocaust, you hear stories about like, some had bread, some didn't. And then I guess this applies also with sharing the bread. But I'm wondering, what was my question? Like, is it the same comparison?
So I want to keep the discussion. Our discussion is only what you're required to do. Now, if this man that has a jug of water wants to share it, there'll be different opinions that say, is he allowed to share it if he wants to? Some opinions might say, no, you're not allowed to share it because Rabbi Akiva said, your life comes first, so you have to drink it. Other opinions might say, no, don't take it so far. There's nothing wrong if you drink the water for yourself, but if you want to share, that's definitely a certain your own option to do that. You want to go above the letter of the law, you can do that. So the same thing when the questions of, are you allowed to take the white card and do you have to take the white card is a little different question. Am I allowed to take the white card? Even if I say you are allowed, doesn't mean you have to, or maybe it does mean you have to. So there's always different opinions. The next branch is always to say, now that we said you're allowed to, now it doesn't mean you have to, right? That's always how it happens. Okay, so let's go. Let's continue the development of our case. So let's tweak the jug case a little bit. Imagine in the case of the water jug, you see your friend has a cup of water and you say, hey, let me steal the cup from him. I want to save my life. My life comes first. Didn't we say preservation of your own life comes first? Because there it involves a bad behavior, the behavior of theft. So to steal, to save your life when it's not going to cause somebody else death, that's okay. You're allowed to steal to save your life, but not at the expense of somebody else's life. See, so you tweak the scenario a little bit, it actually changes. Just your own water, you're allowed to keep. A water that's in partnership, you're not allowed to drink for yourself. You have to split it, even if both of you are going to die, because it's not your water to steal. You have a partnership in the water. Somebody else's water, you're certainly not allowed to steal. And that's developed by later commentaries. The Shita Mikubetzes in text 15, I assume. Text 15 is that principle of it only applies when it's your own water, then you can drink it. But to steal somebody else's water and cause him to die, that's not allowed because you just became your blood is not redder than the other person's blood. Okay, let's try to apply it. Yes, Stan.
It seems to me though that you kind of would be, the preferred decision would be to share because we do not know what the future holds and we're assuming there will be no divine intervention. What if there is divine intervention? You drink all the water and don't share and then it rains the next day.
But Stan, let me give you a different scenario.
Okay.
I'm going to drink the water. And then God will do a miracle for my friends. Right? Why do I assume that I have to drink half the water and he'll drink half the water and then rely on miracles? Let me rely fully on miracles for my friend and save myself. So that's the dilemma here. Like, you can't leave things to miracles. You do your best you can, and then the rest is in the hands of Hashem. So if Rabbi Akiva is saying your mitzvah is to save your own life first and leave the rest to Hashem. Right. Obviously, you should know Ben Petura. People that don't see it this way aren't thinking like Ben Petura. It's not like, but we follow the ruling of Rabbi Akiva. So now let's try to apply it to the white card case. Okay. And this was Rav Ashri's decision in text. Okay, it's actually two more building blocks we have to build. Okay, but let's try to go into the white card case, right? If you take this white card Are you killing your friends?
No.
You're not killing. The
No.
Nazis are killing. Okay. Let me ask you a question now. Your friend took a white card. You want to steal the white card from him. What? Very good. So you see how we just developed it? Now we have, based on earlier building blocks, the rabbi in the Kovno Ghetto was able to come to decision. And he used one other building block. Imagine there's a flood heading towards your town. So you start putting sandbags and building a moat around your property to protect your property. But by doing that, you're causing more water to go into your friend's property, causing your friend more damage. Are you allowed to build that moat around your property?
Yeah.
But you're causing more water to go to your friends. What will you say? I'm not arguing with you. Let's clarify here. The reason you're allowed to do it is you could say, let him also build protection around his property. I'm not causing damage to his property. I'm protecting myself. The damage that happens to my friend, that's the flood. And that's similar to what Rabbi Akiva says, preserve yourself. And then, why do we all have to suffer equally? There's no mitzvah to suffer equally. You preserve yourself, do the best you can. You have a mitzvah to protect yourself and to save your property. Follow that mitzvah. Whatever happens, happens. But now let's tweak the scenario a little bit. The water already came into your property, but it doesn't have an outlet. So it's just building up. You say, let me break my wall so it could flood out of my property into my neighbor's property. What do you think about that? Can you do that? But now you're doing something to harm someone. You're actively causing the harm to go there. So there's a difference between if the danger came into your property and now you're diverting the danger before making sure the harm doesn't come your way. But once it comes into you, you cannot now cause it to harm somebody else. So you see here, the delicate line is your behavior. Is your behavior an ethical one? Are you directly causing the damage? If you're protecting yourself, you hope the other person doesn't get damaged either. You're just trying to protect yourself. But if it's in your thing and you're breaking down your wall in order to flood the other person's property, yeah, you're saving yourself at the expense of somebody else. That's not right. So here you see, this is why some communities might develop different rulings, because the balance is so tight and narrow. So sometimes you come in an edge case and now it gets unclear. Is this edge case more similar to A or to B? And that's why different communities develop different customs or different traditions. It's not really because they disagree on fundamentals. They agree on the fundamentals, it's just the application. So how did Rav Oshri decide? He said, let's read it inside in text. Where do we find it? Let's see if I can find it. Maybe we don't have his no, 19? Do we have a 19? No. Okay. In conclusion, how he decided was you're allowed to take the white card if it's in the pool of white cards. But once somebody else took it, you're not allowed to take the card for yourself. With that, we'll conclude this lesson. Those that want to stay extra will analyze one additional case. But thank you for joining us for what I felt was a very riveting lesson on halacha, on what is in the mind of Jewish law. There is the Jewish law for the layman. You want to look for the easy books that's easy to read and easy to learn. But then there's the other pole, which is the rabbis trying to make sure, hold on, you just condensed it, let's unpack it. So you always have this tension of trying to simplify versus trying to expand. And so we looked at both of those things today, and we'll see you next week as we look at Jewish philosophy and ethical teachings. That's for lesson 5.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi, can I relate a true to
That's the
life?
case we're going to do now. The case we're going to do now, for those that want to stick around, is the case of the child.
Rabbi, I'd like
Hold,
to
hold on, wait, Shelley. Yes, Dan?
I'd like to relate a true to life story concerning my father, who was a survivor at the concentration camps. And he told me he knew Oscar Schindler, and Oscar Schindler offered him a position in his factory, telling him his life would be much easier in the factory than in the concentration camps. My father was a very talented mechanic, and he told Oscar Schindler, take somebody without a talent. They're not going to kill me. They need me to keep their machinery
Wow.
running. Well, to make a long story short, because my father made this decision, he saw his brother in one of the lines for the gas chambers, and he knew the commandant. He had found the typewriter and fixed it. He gave it to the commandant, whose wife was an author, and as a favor to my father, because he liked my father, he says, what can I do for you for this? This is such a beautiful gift from my wife. And my father said, that man is my brother. Get him out of the line. He can work with me. He's also a mechanic. And my father, because he didn't take the easy road, was able to save his brother's life.
Wow.
Amazing. Amazing. That's beautiful. He had typewriter. So he gave up his life in order to, he put himself more at risk. He said, I could save 2 lives. And then that helped him to save his brother's life. That's incredible. You know, just to tweak, just one last thought on this paradigm before we go on to the next halach for those that are staying, is, you know, a rabbi was asked a difficult situation. He said, my son was in a line, he was caught up in the ghetto, in a selection, that means trouble, right? And I knew I could bribe the officials to get him out, but I knew that the official is going to have to take somebody else. So based on what we discussed, are you allowed to do that? No, you're not allowed to do that. But think about a person, it's your son. It's your son. But you say you're not allowed to hurt yourself, save yourself or your family. That's going to hurt somebody else. Now, we're not judging people who made tough decisions. It's under stress and pressure, and they're all sacrificed their lives for being Jewish, and Hashem should protect us and heal us. And that was a beautiful story, Stan. Unbelievable. Yeah. Yes.
And that is 100% true.
Bye,
Good
everyone. Bye. Thanks for sharing, Stan. That was like so heart-wrenching.
Shootings and say there's a teacher with a class of children, and she has a choice. You know, I'll shield them. She's supposed to shield them rather than take care of herself and just escape and save her own life. What do the rabbis say about, you know, not having anything?
Well, if you're hired as a protector, then that's what you signed up to do. So maybe that's the teacher, when he takes the job of being a teacher, accepts that responsibility. So you might see how it gets a little different. If you tweak it a little different, like if you're hired as a security guard, and then when it gets dangerous, you leave. What kind of security guard are you? Right? So that's a dilemma. So let's go and discuss. Let's see if we have everyone here. Okay, let's discuss 2 babies, 1 heart. You ready for this? Okay, so let's review the case, and then we'll try to go through. Yes, Rafaela.
Mayo wants to tell you something, and then he's gonna go to sleep.
Good night.
Good night, Mayor. Thanks for learning Torah with Tati.
Good night to everyone.
Good
Bye.
Good night.
Okay, so let's review the case. We have 2 babies. This was a couple in New Jersey. They had a conjoined twins, and the conjoined twins, one of them is going to die. One of them is probably going to die anyways. The question is if you can proactively kill that baby in order to potentially save the other one.
I believe, yes, you are allowed to.
Hold on. Just, you said you're allowed to?
Yeah.
What do you think? But remember we said a temporary life is infinitely valuable. Remember we said that?
That's true.
We said living for a few minutes, you're shortening someone's life, is tantamount to murder.
I would say no.
You'd say no? What do you think about that?
So I think you logically say, well, you can preserve one life, which sounds like a good thing, even though one is going to be sacrificed. I would do that.
You say you do sacrifice one, you attempt the surgery, you could save one life. Okay, so Joe, what do you think here?
I don't know. It's very difficult. These are cases
Right.
that there's as far as I know, there's no right answer. And Halacha might not agree with that, but there's no answer.
It's no guarantee that that child will survive.
No.
So
So we have competing values here. We have a value not to murder, but we also have a value to save life, right? And we're trying to tweak it out. If we just looked at the principles that we just developed until now of Rav Ashri's case in the Covenant Ghetto, we might think that we shouldn't do anything because you're doing an action that's causing, you're proactively killing one at the expense of the other. But this is not how Rav Moshe Feinstein ruled. He ruled that you can attempt the surgery. What was the building blocks? Now he brought in a third principle. And now with the third principle, it actually comes clear. So imagine the scenario where a woman is pregnant and the doctors say either the baby is aborted or the mother dies. We have to do one or the other.
it's always save the mother first.
So what do? We save the mother. We save the mother. Well, the basic principle is that there's two principles. But one principle is the womb, the baby, the fetus is like a limb of the parents. Just like a limb, you sometimes amputate to save the whole person. So the fetus is seen in that way. However, once the fetus head emerges,
You save the child.
now, hold on. We're not saying you save one at the expense of that. We're just saying now you have two equal lives. Now you can't choose one over the other. You're not allowed to. So you cannot kill. You could do whatever you can, except for killing one or the other.
So you have the birth, carry through the birth.
You have to carry through the birth. You do whatever you can to try to preserve both lives because they're both infinitely equal. Right? However, there's a new building block that we're going to add here. And that is the idea of a rodef. Okay? The idea of a rodef, let's go, we're in appendix now. So let's go to page text 21, it's on page 177. In the book of Numbers, God tells the Jewish people, attack the Midianites. Says the Midrash, why? Why should we attack the Midianites? Because they are belligerent to you. From here, the sages derive. If someone is coming to kill you, preempt them and kill them first. See, that doesn't make any sense. Each life is infinitely valuable, right? Someone's coming to kill you. Why should you kill him? If you're preserving your life, but you're killing him, so now there's anyways one less life. So why is your blood rather than their blood? Well, if you didn't have the Torah's verse right here, you would think maybe, but the Torah clearly tells us here it doesn't work that way. If someone is coming to kill you, you kill them first.
So if you're being robbed at gunpoint, somebody's coming in your house, you can shoot them and kill them.
That's a very broad, because we might say, oh, does he actually intend to kill you? Maybe shoot his leg first. But yeah, in broad terms, yes. In broad terms, yes. So much so that any thief that comes into your house, we consider them intending to kill you. Because if you're going to kill them to defend yourself, they're going to try to kill you to not get killed. So you're right. But it's, as you tweak the scenario a little bit here, a little bit there, it's not so clear cut. But yeah, someone's coming to kill you, you kill them first. What happened to someone who's not coming to kill you? He's just causing your death. So, for example, two people go on a skydiving, right? They jump out of the plane, and one of them pulls the cord, and his parachute opens, and the other one pulling the cord, nothing. Or he realized he jumped out without a parachute.
It's tough luck.
Tough luck, right? But now he grabs on to the other guy's leg. And now the gravity is too fast and it's making the other parachute ineffective. Is the guy that's attached to the parachute allowed to kick off the person holding onto his leg?
I would think so.
What?
I would say. No, I would say.
Is the guy that's holding onto his leg trying to kill him?
No.
No.
But he will kill him.
What?
But if the two people cannot be supported by the parachute, then if you don't kick that person off, both will die.
Well, remember the case of the water? We said you save your what? In the case of the water, we said you should save your own life first, right? You drink your own water. I have the parachute. I get to keep the parachute myself. But you might say, here it's a little different. You're drinking your own water. By kicking the person off your leg, you're literally sending him to his death. But the din of the rodef applies. That if someone's coming to kill you, you kill him first. In other words, this person who's holding onto your leg, he's not being passive. He's actively causing your death. So someone who's actively causing your death, even if he's not even trying to cause your death, but he's actively causing you to die,
Then you're allowed to.
then you have the rule, someone who's coming to kill you, you kill him first. And now we introduce this third building block, this third value into the equation. And now that's how Moshe Feinstein ruled. You had these two twins. For the twin who has a chance to live, the other baby being attached to him is trying to kill him. He's not trying to kill him, but by staying attached and sucking from the other four chambers of the heart that really was mainly in, but that's not enough. That's not enough on its own, because you say, you're taking action. Why are we getting involved? Okay, if the baby wants to reject the other baby, that's fine. But we're surgeons. We're coming in to intervene in between two innocent creatures that are trying to just survive. So there's one extra case here. Give me a second.
They had a co-joined heart.
You don't even answer that dilemma.
I'll
You
give
say
you-
that you don't say the outcome. So thank you for telling us.
So this was the key consideration. In the case of the conjoined twins, Rabbi Feinstein's key question, because remember we had the mother and the baby are competing, right? Remember the mother and the baby scenario where they're both trying to live, and we said don't intervene.
Yeah.
Even though each one is a rodef to the other, right? Each one they're trying to. If you kill one, you save the other. If you save one, we said don't intervene, right?
Mhm.
So you think, okay, maybe the mother could kill the baby, or maybe the baby could kill the mother to save their own life. But we as surgeons, how can we get involved into that conflict? But his question was, Rabbi Feinstein's key question to Dr. Koop was, would it be possible to give the heart to baby A so that baby A would be the one to live? So the answer that Dr. Koop said was no. The only option was either not to separate the two babies, in which case both would die, or give the heart to baby B. In other words, Dr. Feinstein said, Rabbi Feinstein basically decided as follows. If you told me that we have one heart, we could either give it to baby A and a live, or give it to baby B and a live. So in that scenario, you cannot mix in. Because why should you choose baby A over baby B? Or why should you choose the mother over the fetus, right? Why is one blood rather than the other? But over here, Dr. Koop said, if you do nothing,
They're both.
they're both gonna die. If you do something, baby A for sure won't survive either way. There's no chance for baby A. There is a chance to save baby B. So in that scenario, he said baby A was completely dependent his whole life. He was like the person holding on with the parachute out to the leg. His whole life was dependent on baby A. He didn't have his own on baby B. His baby A's life was dependent on baby B. He was eroded. He was sucking off the heart. Most of the chambers of the heart were in baby B. So therefore, we save baby B's life. So that was his ruling. And you see how these heavy, heavy questions are posed. And just like this scenario, and now if we learned this class, if this scenario happened to you, God forbid, but if it had to happen, I wouldn't say, oh, I just learned it in the class, so now I can apply it. Why? Because we're laymen. We don't know. We cannot just follow his ruling. We have to speak to a competent rabbi who could see, oh, there's a slight difference in this case. And he could be aware, oh, okay, we don't really apply Feinstein's ruling so broadly. Or so if a case repeats itself, other responses written either saying, oh, I agree with Rav Moshe Feinstein's ruling, and it's an exact analogous situation, or might say actually the situation is a little different, or they interpret the conclusion of Moshe Feinstein wasn't 100%. It was based on flawed interpretation of either the pursuer doctrine or the red blood, my blood is redder than yours doctrine, or preservation of life doctrine. So if you tweak one of these values a little bit, you could get to very different conclusions, and that's why different communities develop different customs. So one of the powerful things is that you can have a practicing Jew that has a friend that has an entirely different set of practices within halacha, and says, I have no problem with you. You don't have to see eye to eye with me, because I decided, my rabbi told me to act that way. Your rabbi told you to act your way. You're both following halacha, Jewish law. So it's good. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone. As long as they were using, the rabbi was using a good methodology, and he was being sincere and truthful, then sometimes the application comes out a little different, and it's part of God's design. God wants it to be.
So when you face with, God forbid, you face, you shouldn't go to more than one rabbi.
Oh, you shouldn't do shopping.
Right.
Unless you shouldn't do rabbi shopping, but sometimes you might come to a rabbi, and the rabbi will tell you, don't ask me this question. Because if you ask me this question, the answer is not going to be to your liking. And I know that there's a different rabbi who's also a God-fearing person, who follows halacha, but because of little tweaks in the equation, in the model, he'll probably come out with a different interpretation that will better. So don't ask me this question. Go to him. If you want to ask me, you could ask me. But so sometimes you'll have that, because it's this principle, like my decision is not the only right decision, but it's what God wants. So this was an important principle. Sometimes rabbis were asked difficult questions, and the rabbi would say, I cannot answer unless it's a real life scenario. If it's a real life scenario, God helps to come with the right answer. But if it's just a theoretical scenario, then you don't have the assistance of Hashem to come to the right conclusion. You just have your brain, and brains make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. So there's a lot of halachic works that are theoretical halacha. They don't have the same value as a decision that was made in real life. If a decision was made in real life, it's always considered more authoritative than some Ivy League group making a scenario and making a ruling on it. Okay, it's good that they did their homework, but it doesn't have the same weight because it wasn't real life.
What if you face a decision for yourself?
Yeah.
And if you go for the surgery, there's a possibility that you'll die.
Right.
In
Torah has opinions on this.
Right. Does the rabbi who you ask, let's say, have to get all the information from the medical
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
And look at everything and then tweak it and then let you know.
Yeah, and not just that, it could get a little complicated because you could have two rabbis, right? One rabbi, he understands the language of doctors, so he's able to translate. The other one, if the rabbi and the doctor are not on talking terms and they don't want to collaborate with each other, it could come out with a very bad ruling because either the doctor is hiding information because the doctor has his agenda of how he thinks what the moral decision is to make, or the rabbi doesn't know enough medical information, so his ruling is worthless because he doesn't really understand the scenario. So you really need a rabbi and doctor team that are working together. One of the things famous, the Rebbe didn't decide in halachic matters. People would write him halachic questions. The Rebbe said, "Go to the rabbi of Krahan's or go to your own rabbi. I'm not getting involved in halachic questions." There was one or two instances where the Rebbe did get involved. There was a shipping company from Israel. You don't have to. There was a shipping company in Israel that was crewed by a Jewish crew. And the Rebbe was saying a Jewish crew cannot run a ship on Shabbos. Now, a bunch of rabbis were saying, "Oh, it's okay because it's autonomous. They're doing now ships are built that it's autonomous. There's no work that needs to be done by the crew on Shabbos. It's just running on autopilot." This was in the 60s or the 70s. So the Rebbe said, "I know Jewish law very well. In addition, I also worked for the Navy. I'm an electric engineer. And I'm telling you, here are my concerns of how it's impossible that today, with current technology, this ship is really running as autonomous. If you can prove to me A, B, C," he lived out 20 things where it's like, hold on, you don't have to send out your coordinates every certain amount of hours. You don't have to do, he just gave a list. If you can come to me and show that there's not an issue, fine. And the company never was able to produce such information. And so Jewish clients stopped using that company. That was like one scenario where you need someone that knows both areas very well. There's also just a humorous, there was once in the early founding of the state of Israel, there were more Western modern kids and they were playing soccer. So they wanted to know if they can play soccer on Shabbat. So they came to one of the rabbis who was more friendly to the more modern secular children. There were rabbis that were, "How dare you? No." But they went to more friendly Rabbi Cook. And they asked him, "Can we play soccer on Shabbat?" So he said, "What is soccer?" He said, "Well, you have a ball and you have a post and a net, and you have to get the ball into the net." So he said, "Why don't you put the ball there before Shabbat?" Right. So you see how if you don't understand what you're discussing, it could, right?
Or why
Good
not
night,
allowed?
Rabbi.
Good night, Stan. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Nice.
I said your wedding